The summer sun baked the manicured lawns of Brookhaven Estates, where the wealthy gathered for their annual neighborhood showcase, a cocktail party draped in champagne flutes, string quartets, and whispered boasts about portfolios. The crown jewel of the event was parked center stage, a cherry-red 1969 Ford Mustang Shelby GT500, polished until it gleamed like molten fire. It belonged to Charles Whitmore, the man who owned half the dealerships in Atlanta and carried himself with the easy arrogance of someone who never heard the word no. Charles was 58, but dressed as though age had politely skipped him. Navy blazer tailored sharp across his shoulders, Italian loafers reflecting sunlight, salt and pepper hair styled with precision. His face was lined, but only in ways that spoke of expensive cigars and long nights of control. He stood beside the car with a whiskey glass in hand, accepting compliments as though they were his birthright. Then the Mustang coughed, a sputter at first, then a plume of steam rising from under the hood. Guests chuckled awkwardly, their admiration stalling with the engine. Charles's jaw tightened as he tossed the whiskey back and waved the valet over. The boy fumbled with the latch, clueless. Charles sneered. That's when she noticed. Amara Johnson, 22, had been balancing trays of hors d'oeuvres for the catering service, her black apron tied over grease-stained jeans she'd worn underneath. Her hair, natural and coiled into a bun, framed a face that was both youthful and sharpened by responsibility. Her brown skin glistened under the Georgia heat, and her dark eyes, calm but probing, followed the Mustang with more focus than the guests sipping champagne. Amara's father had been a mechanic, the kind who knew the hum of an engine better than his own heartbeat. He'd passed 2 years ago, leaving Amara the legacy of calloused hands, and a love for machines that purred when understood. By day, she studied engineering at Georgia Tech. By night, she catered events like this to keep her mother and little brother afloat. "Need a hand?" she asked softly, stepping forward when no one else seemed to know what to do. Charles turned, blinking as though a fly had spoken, his lips twisted into a smirk. "What's this? The caterer thinks she can fix a Shelby GT500? A ripple of laughter broke among the men beside him. Amara's gaze didn't waver. She wiped her palms on her apron, posture steady, refusing to shrink. "I know a misfiring carburetor when I hear one," she said evenly. "Might be your fuel pump. Won't take me long to check." Charles's smirk widened into cruelty. And as this story unfolds, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these stories. Post your location and local time in the comments below. He chuckled at his own joke, treating her suggestion as entertainment for the crowd. The laughter stung, but Amara didn't move. "All due respect, sir. You can laugh or you can drive home tonight. Choice is yours." For a flicker, Charles's jaw clenched, ego wrestling with practicality. Guests leaned in. Even the valet stepped back, sensing a storm. Finally, Charles waved his hand as if granting a peasant permission. "Fine, impress us." Amara set her tray down, tied her apron tighter, and approached the Mustang. She touched the hood like greeting an old friend. Tools were fetched reluctantly by the valet, and with sleeves rolled to the elbow, she leaned in. Her hands were steady, practiced, unfastening, inspecting, listening. Charles stood over her with arms crossed, feigning boredom but watching every move. Within minutes, Amara tapped a line with her knuckle. "Here's your problem. Pump's clogged. She won't breathe until you clear her throat." Charles scoffed. "Nonsense! That car's been serviced at the finest shops." But when Amara twisted a valve and coaxed the throttle, the Mustang roared alive. The growl was smooth, strong, undeniable. Gasps turned into applause. The valet grinned. Guests exchanged looks of surprise. Charles's smirk faltered, though he quickly forced it back. "Beginner's luck," he muttered. But before he could step away, his gaze dropped to Amara's left hand as she adjusted the hood. There it was. A simple, silver ring. Not flashy, not ostentatious, but deliberate. Charles's eyes narrowed. The laughter in his throat curdled into silence. He knew that ring, or rather, what it meant. Rumors had swirled about Amara, about her engagement to Jordan Mitchell, the son of his late business rival. Charles had despised Jordan's father, a man who had once challenged his empire and lost everything. The idea that his rival's son had not only survived but had chosen this girl. It struck Charles like betrayal echoing from the grave. He spoke low, venom lacing his words. "Who gave you that ring?" Amara looked up, brows furrowing at the sudden hostility. my fiancée." The crowd, sensing the shift, grew hushed. Charles leaned closer, his voice sharpened like glass. "Careful, girl. In this world, rings don't mean love. They mean leverage. And you don't belong in this one." Amara's jaw tightened, her dignity a shield. "Belonging isn't given. It's earned." Her words hung in the thick Georgia air, bold and unflinching. Some guests looked away, uncomfortable. Others stared, captivated. And Charles, though outwardly sneering, felt the first crack in his armor, a tremor of something he hadn't faced in years. Doubt. The Mustang hummed behind them, alive once more. And with its purr came the sound of a story just beginning to burn. The Mustang's engine purred like a living thing, drawing eyes back to its gleaming bodywork. But the true center of gravity remained at the hood, between Charles Whitmore's steely glare and Amara Johnson's calm defiance. The party had no expected this turn. Guests who had been sipping champagne now whispered behind manicured fingers. Some chuckled nervously, unsure whether to laugh with Charles or admire the young woman who had made him look foolish. A few, those who had long endured his arrogance, secretly savored the sight. Charles's pride, however, was not built to bend. He clapped his hands sharply, startling the valet. "Well," he boomed, voice dripping with mockery, "thank you for tonight's entertainment. Who knew the catering staff doubled as amateur mechanics? Perhaps next time you'll juggle too." Laughter followed, forced and brittle. It was not the free, rolling kind Charles once commanded, but he pressed on, needing dominance more than truth. Amara did not flinch. She pulled her apron back into place, brushing the grease from her fingers with the grace of someone used to being underestimated. Her dark eyes lifted, steady as steel. "Engines don't care how rich you are," she said quietly. "They only respond to those who listen." The words struck deeper than the crowd realized. Charles's jaw twitched. For a moment he seemed ready to strike back, but instead he turned his gaze toward her hand again. That ring, that single glint of silver gnawed at him like rust creeping under fresh paint. "Tell me," he said, voice lowering into venom, "is it true? Are you engaged to Jordan Mitchell?" The air froze. Guests knew the history. Two rival tycoons, Charles Whitmore and Thomas Mitchell, locked in a battle of dealerships and pride for decades. When Thomas's empire crumbled, Charles stood over the ashes, the victor. The Mitchell name was supposed to vanish into whispers, yet here stood Amara, wearing Jordan's promise on her hand. Her chin lifted, unashamed. "Yes, I am." A ripple moved through the crowd. Some gasped, some smiled with intrigue. Charles's face, however, hardened like stone. "Of course you are," he spat. "The boy who squandered his inheritance and his father's respect. And now he clings to you, a girl serving shrimp skewers at parties." His eyes glittered cruelly. "Tell me, does the ring feel heavy? Knowing it was bought with pity?" Gasps flared again, sharper this time. A few women shifted uncomfortably, murmuring. The valet's hands curled at his sides as though he might intervene. But Amara stood firm, her back straight, her gaze unwavering. She removed the tray from her arm and set it on the table beside her. Then she faced Charles squarely. "This ring," she said, voice carrying across the lawn, "wasn't bought with pity. It was given with love, something money has clearly never taught you." A silence settled. The string quartet stopped mid-note. For the first time in years, Charles Whitmore felt his power waver. He forced a laugh, brittle and sharp. "Love," he sneered, spoken like someone who's never held a fortune. "Trust me, Miss Johnson. Love is a story told by those who can't afford the truth." His words landed like a slap. Amara's chest rose with a slow breath. Inside, she felt the heat of humiliation, the sting of being belittled in front of strangers. But she would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her falter. She thought of her mother working double shifts at the hospital, of her little brother Malik saving coins in a jar to buy parts for his bicycle. She thought of Jordan, who had held her hand through late nights of study, who had told her she was brilliant even when the world looked past her. Her silence, calm, unbroken, became its own form of defiance. And the crowd noticed. A man in a gray suit whispered to his wife, "She fixed that car faster than the shops do." Another muttered, "Whitmore's gone too far this time." Charles saw the shift. He felt it like sand slipping through his fingers. His empire was built on respect, on awe. If he lost that, what was left? So he doubled down. "Fine," he barked. "If you're so skilled, Miss Johnson, perhaps you'd like to prove it. Tom, Oro, at the showcase rally. I'll bring my Shelby. You'll face it with whatever heap you can scrounge together. Let's see if your so-called brilliance stands when it matters." The showcase rally. It was the centerpiece of the weekend, a parade of restored classics, judges awarding prestige, investors mingling with millionaires. No caterer had ever stood in its circle. The challenge was outrageous, cruelly designed to break her. Gasps filled the air. Some smiled at the drama. Others shook their heads. Amara looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then, with the quiet certainty of a mountain unmoved by storm, she said, "I'll be there." A murmur rippled across the lawn. Charles's eyes glittered with triumph, believing he had cornered her. But deep inside, a shadow of doubt whispered, what if she truly could stand against him? The Mustang's engine idled behind them, a steady growl, as if the machine itself knew the stage was set for more than just metal and pride. The morning of the showcase rally arrived crisp and golden, the kind of southern day where the air smelled faintly of magnolia and gasoline. Rows of classic cars lined the fairgrounds, polished Cadillacs, chrome-drenched Chevrolets, a few gleaming foreign imports. Owners hovered proudly beside their machines, shaking hands with judges, networking with investors, sipping coffee from porcelain cups. At the center of it all stood Charles Whitmore's Mustang, polished to blinding perfection, its hood propped open like a crown on display. Charles himself wore a slate-gray suit with a crimson tie, his posture regal, his smirk firmly in place. The night before had rattled him, but today he was determined to restore order. The crowd gathered early, buzzing with curiosity. Word had spread quickly. A young black woman, a caterer, had accepted Charles's challenge. Some came for the spectacle, some for the scandal, and a quiet few, perhaps, hoping to see arrogance humbled. Amara arrived without fanfare. She wore worn jeans, a Georgia Tech t-shirt tucked beneath a leather jacket, and boots scuffed from years in her father's old garage. Her hair was braided neatly down her back, her silver ring catching the morning light. She carried only a small toolbox, dented and scratched from use. When she walked through the rows of cars, conversations slowed. Some men scoffed, whispering, "Where's her car?" "She's joking, surely. Charles is going to bury her." But Amara's gaze didn't waver. She spotted her fiancé, Jordan Mitchell, waiting near the edge of the crowd. Jordan, 25, was tall with chestnut-brown skin, close-cropped curls, and a quiet strength in his eyes. His clothes were simple, dark jeans and a button-down shirt. But he carried himself with a dignity that wealth could never erase. He squeezed her hand as she approached. "You don't have to do this." "Yes," Amara said softly. "I do." Charles spotted her and raised his voice so all could hear. "Ah, Miss Johnson, our guest of honor. I trust you've brought something resembling a competitor." Laughter bubbled from the crowd. Amara said nothing, only walked forward until she stood across from him, the sun painting her in gold. "I don't need a car to compete," she said evenly. "I just need yours." A murmur rippled. Charles blinked. "Excuse me?" She set her toolbox down beside the Mustang. "You wanted me to prove myself? Then let me prove it here on your turf with your machine. Give me an hour with this engine. Let the judges decide if I've improved it." The audacity silenced the crowd. Even the judges, clipboard in hand, looked intrigued. Charles's smirk returned. "You want to touch my car again? After yesterday's stunt? Fine. But when you fail, and you will, you'll prove to everyone that last night was nothing more than luck." He stepped back dramatically, gesturing to the Mustang. "The stage is yours, caterer." The insult landed sharp. A few in the audience chuckled, but many shifted uneasily, sensing cruelty. Amara ignored it. She rolled up her sleeves, pulled her braids over one shoulder, and set to work. Every motion was deliberate. She inspected the carburetor, adjusted the idle, cleaned a valve. The crowd leaned closer, whispering as she explained softly to Jordan what she was doing, her voice carrying just enough for others to hear. "The fuel mixture's off, running too rich. That's why it sputtered yesterday. These older Shelbys breathe better when you tune by ear, not numbers. Jordan smiled, his pride quiet but radiant. The crowd, to their surprise, began nodding. A man in a leather jacket murmured, "She knows her stuff." Another added, "That's exactly what my old man used to say." Charles's confidence faltered as the murmurs grew. He forced laughter, louder this time, as though volume could drown out truth. "She's putting on a show, nothing more." But when Amara turned the key, the Mustang roared to life, not just running, but singing. The engine's growl was deeper, smoother, resonant. Judges leaned in, nodding with appreciation. One even clapped. The applause swelled, scattered at first, then steady. Guests smiled, impressed despite themselves. The valet from the night before pumped his fist discreetly. Amara wiped her hands on a rag, her breathing calm. She didn't gloat, she didn't smirk. She simply stepped back and said, "Engines don't lie." The crowd erupted. Charles's face drained of color. For the first time in years, the respect in their eyes wasn't for him, it was for her. He opened his mouth, desperate to reclaim control, but his words caught in his throat. One of the judges stepped forward. "Impeccable tuning. This Shelby hasn't sounded this sharp in years. You've got a gift, Miss Johnson," she said, her tone, voice steady. "Amara Johnson." The name carried. The audience repeated it in whispers, committing it to memory. Charles stood frozen, fists tightening at his sides. He had meant to humiliate her. Instead, she had humiliated him, without arrogance, without cruelty, just skill, just truth. And truth, he realized with dread, was something he could no longer buy. The sun had risen higher, burning away the cool softness of morning. By noon, the showcase rally was in full swing, engines roaring, announcers calling out numbers, crowds cheering as cars paraded past the stands. But at the center ring, it wasn't the cars that held attention. It was the young woman with grease-stained fingers who had outshined the millionaire everyone had come to admire. Charles Whitmore could feel it, the shift. Respect, once his to command with a glance or a handshake, was slipping like oil through his palms. Every smile seemed smaller, every nod slower, every laugh directed at her, not him. His empire, his persona, his pride, it was all cracking. And Charles Whitmore was not a man who endured cracks. So when the announcer called for a demonstration, an optional segment where owners showcased mechanical skill for bonus recognition, Charles saw his chance to claw back control. He strode forward, voice booming over the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I propose something special. Since Miss Johnson claims expertise, let's truly put her to the test. Right here, in front of all of you, I'll expose a fault in my Shelby. If she can fix it in 10 minutes, I'll admit she has skill. If not..." He let the words hang, his smirk sharp as a blade. "Then she returns to the kitchen where she belongs." Gasps, murmurs, a few scattered laughs, uncomfortable but present. Amara's stomach twisted, not from fear, but from the sting of his words. She looked at Jordan in the crowd, at his steady eyes that whispered, "You don't have to prove anything." But she also saw her mother's tired face, Malik's hopeful grin, her father's calloused hands guiding hers around a wrench years ago. She stepped forward. "I accept." The crowd buzzed louder, judges raised eyebrows, even the announcer hesitated, then gave a nod for the spectacle to proceed. Charles popped the hood with dramatic flair. With the precision of a man who had spent decades around cars, but never truly with them, he loosened a line, deliberately causing a stall-inducing fault. He turned back to the crowd. "There. A challenge fit for a so-called mechanic." The clock began. Amara slid into place, her toolbox by her side. She inhaled once, deeply, tuning out the noise. Her fingers traced the engine like reading braille, finding the fault by sound, smell, touch. She spoke softly as she worked, not to boast, but to calm herself, and the crowd leaned in to hear. "See the way it sputters? That's airflow, too much choke. He disconnected the vacuum line here." Her hands moved swiftly, reattaching, adjusting, tightening. Sweat glistened on her brow, the sun relentless, but her focus was unbreakable. She worked with the certainty of someone who had grown up fixing broken things, not for glory, not for applause, but because survival demanded it. At 6 minutes, she turned the key. The Shelby roared back to life, stronger than before, its growl steady and pure. The crowd erupted into applause, louder than ever. Judges stood, clapping. The announcer raised his hands, declaring, "Fault repaired in 6 minutes, 42 seconds. Remarkable work." Amara stepped back, chest rising and falling, her face calm but her hands trembling faintly. She had done it. Again. The crowd chanted her name now. Amara! Amara! Charles's world collapsed, his smirk vanished, his body rigid as though struck. The applause didn't belong to him anymore. It belonged to her. The respect, the admiration, the awe. Stolen by a girl he had mocked, dismissed, humiliated. For a long, trembling moment he said nothing. Then, shockingly, he moved. Charles walked around the Mustang, his expensive shoes crunching gravel, his face pale. He stopped in front of Amara, and before anyone could understand what was happening, he fell to his knees beside the Mustang, hands clutching the hood like a confessional rail. His voice cracked, raw and unguarded. "I thought respect was something you could buy, something you could own. But you earned it." His head bowed, silver hair catching the sunlight. Tears welled, unhidden. "And I treated you like less than nothing. I was wrong. I was so wrong." The crowd froze. Whispers cut through the air. Some gasped, some looked away, uncomfortable at the sight of power crumbling. Amara stood still, heart pounding. She hadn't expected this. She had braced for rage, for insults, for one last cruel blow. But not this. Not the sight of a millionaire broken, kneeling in the dirt before her. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but steady. "Respect isn't given to the loudest man in the room. It's given to the one who listens. Maybe it's not too late for you to learn." The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. And then, slowly, the clapping began again. Soft, hesitant, then growing into thunder. This time it wasn't just for her skill. It was for the truth that had just cracked open on that rally ground, that arrogance could break, and humility could rise in its place. Charles stayed on his knees, shoulders shaking, as the world he'd built around pride shattered in front of him. And Amara, silver ring glinting on her finger, stood taller than she ever had before. The air at the fairgrounds buzzed with something more than the sound of engines. It was thick with disbelief, with awe, with the kind of electricity that surged when pride toppled and truth stood tall in its place. Charles Whitmore, the man who had built an empire on arrogance and control, remained on his knee, beside his Shelby. His tailored suit, once a symbol of untouchable power, now looked small, crumpled in the gravel. And Amara Johnson, standing above him, wasn't just a girl who had fixed a car. She was the center of gravity, the figure everyone's eyes clung to, the unexpected heart of the day. The applause rolled across the crowd like thunder. Judges clapped with genuine admiration. Spectators who had once laughed at her whispered her name with reverence. Children pointed at her with wide eyes, as though she were a superhero. But the ripple didn't stop there. Investors, men and women in sharp suits, leaned toward one another. "She tuned that Shelby better than any shop I know." "Did you hear her explain airflow? She teaches while she works." "Georgia Tech, you say? That girl's going places." Even the announcer, voice still trembling from shock, declared into the microphone, "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we've witnessed more than a rally showcase today. We've witnessed history." Amara's chest rose and fell, her pulse racing, but her expression remained calm. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. Her dignity was her armor, and it gleamed brighter than the Mustang's chrome. Then Jordan stepped forward from the crowd. His tall frame moved with quiet confidence, his hand reaching gently for hers. When their fingers laced, the silver ring caught the sunlight again, sending a glint across the stunned faces around them. Jordan's voice carried steady, strong. "This woman is my fiancée. She isn't defined by her job, her clothes, or the money she does or doesn't have. She's defined by her mind, her heart, and her refusal to bend when the world tries to break her. And today, I think we've all seen who truly belongs in this circle." The words hit harder than Charles's kneeling confession. They shifted the crowd even further, peeling away the last of the doubt. A wave of cheers rose, stronger, louder, impossible to contain. Charles lifted his head, eyes red-rimmed. He opened his mouth, but the words drowned beneath the cheers for someone else, for Amara. And that was the cruelest cut. Not her defiance, not her skill, but the world's choice to look past him, toward her. The showcase continued, cars rolling past in dazzling parades, but the main event had already happened. People lingered near Amara, asking her questions about engines, about Georgia Tech, about her future. One judge pressed his business card into her hand. "If you're ever looking for work after graduation, call me. We need minds like yours." Another leaned closer, his voice respectful. "Your father would be proud. You've got his gift, clearly." The words almost undid her. For a moment, Amara felt her throat tighten, the image of her father's grease-stained hands guiding hers, flooding her memory. She swallowed hard, blinking away the heat in her eyes. Meanwhile, Charles tried to gather himself. He stood shakily, brushing gravel from his knees, adjusting his suit. But the murmurs didn't fade. He was no longer the host, the master of ceremonies, the untouchable. He was simply a man who had been forced to face himself, and found wanting. When he looked at Amara again, the old arrogance flared for an instant, before collapsing beneath exhaustion. He could not hate her, not anymore, not after she'd shown him what real respect looked like. But still, pride whispered cruel things in his ear. He turned away, choosing silence over apology, retreating to the edge of the grounds where cameras wouldn't catch his trembling hands. The rally ended with trophies handed out, but no one remembered the winners. They remembered Amara Johnson, the girl with the ring on her finger, who had stood against a millionaire's pride and taught him, and everyone else, what strength truly looked like. That evening, as the crowd dispersed, Amara and Jordan walked to the parking lot together. He carried her toolbox, she carried her dignity, and both carried the weight of the day's revelation. "Do you realize what you did out there?" Jordan asked softly, eyes shining. Amara exhaled, finally allowing herself a small smile. "I just fixed a car." Jordan shook his head, chuckling. "No, you fixed more than that." Behind them, Charles lingered in the shadows of his Shelby, staring at the silver ring once more. The sight of it filled him with something he couldn't quite name. Envy, perhaps. Regret. Or maybe, for the first time in decades, humility. The ripples of the day were far from over. Night fell over Atlanta with a hush, the kind that comes after storms of noise and spectacle. The showcase rally was over, but its echoes lingered in conversations at country clubs, business dinners, and living rooms across the city. The name Amara Johnson was on lips that had never spoken it before. In a downtown restaurant where investors gathered for the post-rally banquet, the atmosphere was split. Half the room buzzed with admiration for Amara, retelling the story of the caterer who outshined Charles Whitmore. The other half whispered nervously about what the spectacle meant for Charles himself. The mighty had stumbled, and in a world built on image, stumbles turned into avalanches. Charles sat at the head of the long mahogany table, but for once the room did not orbit around him. His plate went untouched, his whiskey glass refilled more than once. His suit jacket hung loose, shoulders slumped. Every laugh, every glance that bypassed him and landed on someone else felt like another brick falling from the wall of his empire. He excused himself early, slipping away before dessert, muttering something about business calls. But truth gnawed at him. He wasn't escaping the whispers. He was carrying them home. Amara, meanwhile, sat in her mother's small living room. On the west side of the city. The smell of fried catfish filled the air. Malik chattered excitedly about how his big sister had beaten a millionaire at his own game, and Jordan squeezed her knee gently whenever she looked overwhelmed. Her mother, Angela, a nurse with weary eyes and warm hands, listened silently until Malik darted to his room. Only then did she speak. "Your father used to dream of moments like this," she said softly, her voice thick with memory. "He wanted the world to see what you were capable of. Today, they finally did." Amara blinked back tears, leaning against her mother's shoulder. "I didn't set out to humiliate him. I just couldn't let him take my dignity." Angela's arm wrapped around her. "Dignity is the one thing no one can take. Unless you let them. And you never will." For the first time all day, Amara allowed herself to breathe deeply, to let the tension leave her body. But even in the comfort of her mother's home, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The following week proved her right. Phone calls came, judges offering internships, investors requesting meetings, even a university professor inviting her to speak to his class about engineering. Her professors at Georgia Tech beamed with pride. Her classmates, who once brushed her aside, now looked at her with respect and envy. But with recognition came backlash. Anonymous messages online, rumors at school. Some called her a fraud, others accused her of staging the event with Charles. She ignored them, but they cut nonetheless. And then came the letter. Delivered in a crisp envelope, embossed with Whitmore Industries' seal, it invited Amara to a private meeting at Charles's main dealership. Jordan wanted to burn it. Her mother urged caution. But Amara, steady, unflinching, decided to go. The dealership gleamed under fluorescent lights, marble floors shining, luxury cars lined like Seoul, Dyers on display. Charles stood near the Shelby, hands clasped behind his back, his face taut with restraint. When Amara walked in, her boots echoing against tile, he exhaled heavily. "Miss Johnson." "Mr. Whitmore." Silence stretched between them, the kind that carried a weight no words could soften. Finally, Charles spoke, his voice lower than she had ever heard it. "You've destroyed me." Amara raised a brow. "I didn't destroy you. You did that yourself." His eyes flickered. Anger, shame, grief all tangled. "Do you have any idea what you cost me? Investors are pulling back. Clients are whispering. My name, my reputation, was built on arrogance," she finished, her tone calm, cutting. "And arrogance crumbles the first time it's challenged." Charles's breath shuddered. He looked away, staring at the Shelby as though it might rescue him. Then, slowly, his voice broke. "I hated your father's family. I hated Mitchell. I swore no one tied to them would ever rise above me. But then you—" His voice cracked, the words halting. "You remind me of everything I pretended didn't exist. Talent, integrity, love." Amara's chest tightened. She hadn't expected his confession, not here, not now. Charles turned, eyes wet though he fought to hide it. "I can't undo what I said, the way I treated you. But I can try to make it right." From his pocket he pulled a folded paper, a scholarship deed, named in memory of her late father. Funds for mechanical engineering students who, like Amara, came from families overlooked and underestimated. Her hands trembled as she took it. For a moment, words deserted her. Finally she managed, "This doesn't erase what you did." "I know," Charles whispered, "but maybe it plants something better in the ruins." The silence that followed wasn't bitter. It was heavy, but not hopeless. For the first time, Charles looked less like a titan and more like a man, broken, but trying. Amara nodded once, folding the paper carefully. "Then start there.